Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Wednesday, August 31st. And here's some of what we're talking about tonight. The Justice Department is accusing former President Trump's legal team of interfering with its work. No one's been charged with anything, but what do these claims mean for the department's investigation? New COVID vaccines could soon be on the way, tailored for the most common forms of the virus. Where does the approval process stand? And should you consider a booster? Also, many residents of Mississippi's capital are struggling to find safe drinking water, but crews are working to restore service. We'll have the latest from Jackson. And today marks 25 years since the death of Princess Diana. We'll take a look back at her legacy. The Justice Department is making some strong accusations against former President Trump and his associates. In its latest filing, the department accuses people in Mr. Trump's orbit of impeding its work and making false statements. It says it has evidence, quote, that government records were likely concealed and removed from the storage room, that's a room at Mar-a-Lago, and, quote, that efforts were likely taken to obstruct the government's investigation, unquote. The DOJ's filing also includes photos of classified documents. Some are labeled top secret. That department says that it recovered these documents from President Trump's office. Also, the filing states that the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago produced more than 100 documents. That's more than twice the amount that Mr. Trump's lawyers handed over voluntarily. His legal team signed a letter stating that all the classified material had already been returned. The former president seems to have moved away from claiming that evidence was planted at Mar-a-Lago. Now he's stating that he knew where these documents were. In his words, the FBI took them out of cartons. Now, this filing was in response to President Trump's request for an independent review of these documents, and a federal judge will hold a hearing on that request tomorrow. Let's begin with some context on all of this from NBC Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainslie. And Julia, with all of the legal filings, I wonder where this puts us now. These aren't formal charges, they're strong accusations, but where does this leave us?
Joshua, I've got some context, but I've also got some news for you because Trump has just filed his rebuttal. His legal team is filing their response to what we saw from DOJ. This just came through as I was dialing in to talk to you. I'm reading it through in real time. If I could break it down for you, what I've read so far, I'd love to. So remember, we saw from last night the Justice Department saying that they do not think there's a need for a special master. In fact, they think that that would impede the investigation, slow it down, and could be damaging to national security because they found such highly sensitive documents. They also found and believe that there might be some evidence for obstruction, and that was one of the reasons why they went in, because they believe that some of these documents might be moved on purpose in order to conceal the evidence. Now we're hearing from Trump's justice team, Trump's legal team. This is 19 pages. So far, what I'm seeing is a lot of doubting that the review team, that would be the team appointed by the FBI, was in the position to determine what needed to be handed back to the former president, what might be his. And as usual, we're finding a lot of the details just here in the footnotes. In fact, here they're saying the move-in, meaning in this case the former president and his legal team, submits that any records containing highly personal information should be segregated from the seized materials and returned. They're making the argument that a lot of what was swept up in this search would have been highly personal for the former president and should not be handed over, trying to make the argument that perhaps this is some way to try to embarrass him or take things that are really his. But as we've heard from the Justice Department, they believe that is actually a very small number of documents that would actually belong to the former president, and that they've made those determinations already and returned to him what they think should be returned. But they say that President Trump's personal records are not presidential records, meaning they don't fall under the Presidential Records Act, and so therefore the FBI doesn't have the authority to keep them. But I have to point out here that in the filing we got last night from the Justice Department, they said that this is not just a matter of following the Presidential Records Act, that they believe other laws were violated here. Potentially the Espionage Act, which would keep the former president from bringing on and bringing to Mar-a-Lago some of that really sensitive information that would have been mishandled. And Also, they believe that there could have been an obstruction charge. So still digging through this right now, but at the core of it, it seems that Trump's legal team is trying to say that regardless of the lengthy rebuttal from the Justice Department, they want Judge Cannon to still move forward with appointing a special master as a third party to review the documents seized in the Mar-a-Lago search. And the reason for doing that is that they don't think that the FBI and the Justice Department legal team can be trusted to know what might be the property and the privilege of Trump versus what should go to the government. That's where we are now.
Julia, I'm going to give you a second to flip through this document a little more. I was flipping through it while you were speaking. Sorry for not paying as copious attention to you as I should, but I'm interested in this too. So I do want to point out a few things that are early in the document. Let me give you a second to flip through it. Some of the things that stand out early on, and I'm just kind of, again, looking at this as Julia is looking at it as well. She is far more expert on it than me. But the very first page refers to an unprecedented, and I'm quoting from the document, a, quote, unprecedented, unnecessary, and legally unsupported raid on the home of a president and possibly a candidate against the current chief executive in 2024, unquote. That would lean towards some of the allegations against the Department of Justice that there is a political motivation behind this, which I think it's safe to say is part of the reason for the very unusual transparency that the Department of Justice has shown up to now. If you've watched our show for over the last few weeks, you know DOJ doesn't do this. The transparency comes when they file actual honest-to-God charges. We don't have charges yet. We may never have charges. This is still in the investigatory phase, and what we're looking at now is very unusual in the context of federal courts, particularly because there's no precedent for this happening with a former president. Then further down on page 3, and Julia, maybe you can help me with this sentence. This is the end of kind of the introduction to this document before it starts to go point by point. At the end of page 3, and I'm quoting now, this is the motion from the former president's legal team, quote, despite the clear desperation of the government in avoiding the broad parameters of the PRA, that's the Presidential Records Act, in allowing President Trump to possess documents, movement, that's Donald Trump himself, declines the invitation to take on all potential future litigation in the narrow context of the court's ordered response regarding the appointment of a special master, unquote. Julia Ainslie, can you help me with that piece of this? Clearly, he is taking on the Justice Department in terms of the way that it's tried to get, it's tried to get documents through the Presidential Records Act, which is the issue here, right? That the documents, according to federal investigators, were not fully turned over to the National Archives at the end of his term. But it doesn't sound like he's backing off from requesting a special master, unless I'm reading this wrong. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, I don't think they're backing off of that request. In fact, when they keep going on point by point, they try to hammer home the fact that an independent third party is what's necessary here. I think, and look, we're doing this in real time here, but if I'm going to just weigh in on what I think they're saying here is that they're saying that Trump does not want to get involved in litigation just on the point of regarding a special master. So perhaps that means that if the judge decides not to appoint a special master, they'll move on and that they're not going to continue litigation on that point. But clearly, he's going to keep fighting whatever comes out of the Mar-a-Lago case. And they really, I mean, it's turned into a knife fight here, as you can see from what was filed last night and what was filed tonight. They also even just attack the very breadth of what we saw from the Justice Department, saying that the government is twisting the framework of responding to a motion, meaning their motion, Trump's motion for a special master, into an all-encompassing challenge to any judicial consideration presently or in the future of any aspect of its unprecedented behavior in this investigation. They're basically trying to say, look, Judge, the Justice Department is trying to curb your own ability to appoint a special master, and instead they've given us the whole book trying to explain what they're doing here, but really you should focus merely on the point that they aren't in the position to independently review this material. But you're right, that is a pretty complex and confusing sentence there about Trump declining the invitation to take on potential future litigation as it regards to the special master.
I do want to note that it does, on page 14, say that there are some conditions that were proposed by the government that apparently the former president is amenable to. It says he agrees that the court should direct the parties to submit a joint list of proposed candidates for a special master in the next few weeks, and that they should be required to submit an affidavit concerning any potential reasons for disqualification. So they seem to agree on some of the terms for appointing this special master.
That's right.
I'm not going to force you to do this on the fly, Julie, because I know you want to read. I know you'd like to read through it a little further, but I just want to be clear in terms of where we are with this hearing that happens tomorrow. This is additional context for the hearing at which this matter, I presume, will be decided tomorrow, right?
Well, we're going to hear tomorrow. It's very likely that Judge Kanan could rule, or at least indicate how she'll rule from the bench. It's at 1 p.m. in the Southern District of Florida, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to see her hear from both sides in a court hearing. She doesn't have to decide there, but she already gave inclination last week to show that she would, in fact, grant the request for the special master. But if you'll just indulge me for a second to kind of do this on the fly a little bit more, one thing I did see is that they also are agreeing that it would be appropriate to set deadlines for the special master's review and shorten the time to appeal the special master's decisions. I think that's really interesting because they could still appeal the special master's decisions, but they're at least agreeing to a timeline, because one of the government's arguments is that this would delay the time. That could be something that Judge Kanan will lean on if she decides to grant a special master in this case, by saying, look, this isn't going to delay because they've agreed, we'll set a timeline together here. But the government's still arguing that this is unnecessary and could impede the investigation. But at this point, Joshua, both sides are just digging their heels in. Trump's team definitely wants to appoint it. The Justice Department doesn't want to. And tomorrow should be really interesting in that courtroom.
It should indeed. Thank you, Julia. We'll keep giving you more time to dig through this document. That's NBC Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainslie starting us off tonight. And we will have more coverage of this as we've had some more time to read through it. Keep an eye on NBCNews.com and on the NBC News app. As we have more analysis of it, we'll share it with you. We've been telling you that updated COVID booster shots are on the way. Well, today, the FDA authorized them, specifically formulated to fight the most common Omicron subvariants. The new boosters could be available by next week. The Pfizer shot would be available for people 12 and up. The Moderna booster is for ages 18 and up. Both vaccines were designed for people who have already had their first 2 doses. The last shot has to be at least 2 months before this new one. Now, these new shots are still in the middle of human trials, but Dr. Peter Marks of the FDA says they are still safe and effective.
We're very confident in the data used to support today's actions, particularly as we seek to stem the current wave of COVID-19 and hopefully stave off the coming wave of COVID-19 predicted by scientific models. Ultimately, the public can rest assured that a great deal of care has been taken by the FDA to ensure that these updated boosters meet our rigorous safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing quality standards for emergency use authorization.
Joining us now is NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel with more on these vaccines. Dr. Patel, we had been expecting new versions of this for a while. Dr. Patel, are you? Oh, there you are. Hi, Dr. Patel. Good to see you. We had been expecting new versions of these vaccines for a while, so it's no shock that these are coming out. But how do these fit into the overall strategy for fighting COVID now?
Yeah, Joshua, it's incredibly important because we're seeing newer variants. They're related to BA4 and 5, but we're already seeing an uptick in something called BA4.6 in parts of the United States. And so any version of the coronavirus is going to try to overcome any of our existing immunity, that means the old vaccines and any infections we've had to date, by working its way around it. And so we need a refresh. Those are what the boosters do. And remember, this is not just your old-fashioned booster. This is a booster tailored for not just the new variant, but it does include that original component as well. So kind of a bivalent 2-in-1 vaccine.
Who should get this booster? Are people who are as yet unvaccinated? Is this available to them, or is this just for people who have already been vaccinated and possibly boosted?
Yeah, great question. It is only available for people who have completed that primary series. You don't need to have had any boosters to get this one. but you need to have had the original series of shots. That's the first and second shots for Moderna and Pfizer. And then if you had had Johnson and Johnson, there were some additional shots recommended for that. Then you can get this booster, but it's available for 12 and up. We're already telling patients that we're expecting shipments, as you mentioned, early this weekend. CDC will make further recommendations. We want to be able to get shots in arms. The most important population still stands. All Americans should get this, anyone who's eligible. But of course, we now know with so much data that if over the age of 50, it really is essential that you get this booster. And Joshua, I want to put a plug in. Our booster uptake in general has been really low, and much of the country is back to normal. This is the time, though, to really redouble our efforts on vaccination so we can have a much more normal holiday season than we ever had before.
You mentioned the data. Can you clarify for me where that data stands right now with regard to these new boosters? It's easy to, I think, get sort of lost in the weeds of where the trials are and where the data is and how much we know.
Right.
I just don't want us to go back to 2020 when we had people comparison shopping, vaccines like they were picking out clothes at Target, like which vaccine goes with my clothes better. It just got really weird for a while. How much do we know about the safety and the efficacy of these vaccines?
Right. So good news. The safety, of course, the original part of the vaccine, what we've kind of developed against the original strain of the coronavirus, Josh, we've got billions of doses that have been administered around the world. So we have incredible data on the efficacy, the real world effectiveness, the safety on that. And then we also have a significant amount of knowledge on this mRNA vaccine technology itself. And we also have years of experience with changing vaccines based on animal data. Is it perfect? No, but when we're dealing with a very swift moving pandemic that has mutations that are frequent, having the animal data while we're conducting the human trials tells us, to your point, the data shows us that this version of the booster gives us a higher antibody level that works against BA4 and 5, as well as the original variants, than our existing boosters. That's what we know from animal data. We know that animal data usually correlates then, Joshua, to a certain amount of effectiveness. How much is to be determined. So will this booster help prevent infections or symptomatic infections? It's possible, but we just want to keep preventing the hospitalizations and deaths and not see that decrease. What we all worry about is that the virus mutates enough and it overcomes the immunity that we have, even with the vaccines we have, and that you start to see the virus actually being able to cause more hospitalizations and deaths as immunity decreases or as the virus mutates. So the data we have shows strong safety and strong efficacy signals based on the data from animals, as well as the accumulation of data in humans to date.
With regard to the long term, what are we expecting going forward? Obviously, we're expecting more ups and downs in terms of COVID infections, but is this the way it's going to be, where we keep following COVID and keep making new boosters and taking that one and then we tweak it and we take that one? It feels like kind of a pharmacological game of whack-a-mole. It's great that we can play the game, but are people just going to have to get used to taking COVID shots every year like they get a flu shot every year?
It's possible, and that's why it does feel a bit like whack-a-mole or Groundhog Day, whatever analogy of kind of feeling like I've seen this movie before. And I think that a couple of things. We have the potential to develop vaccines that could last longer. There's a lot of new technologies, coronavirus vaccines that can get multiple versions, nasal vaccines where we sometimes believe that this can give us longer lasting immunity, not just 4 to 6 months, which is what we think we get on these shots now. But I think the critical point is changing our mindset. So instead of saying, okay, this is the third booster that's been out there now for many people, it's, to your point, Joshua, think of this as, if we need to have this be part of a seasonal shot, then that's what it is. My patients don't come up to me and say, doctor, I've had 42 flu shots. Do I need the 43rd? We think of it as an annual flu shot. It's possible that this migrates into that. I see that as a win, not a defeat. But not because I want to play whack-a-mole, but because we've gotten the technology in such a way that we don't have to relive 2020, 2021, parts of 2022 again. So I would set an expectation for Americans, for anyone around the world, that this could be a regular part of our shot series. But it could also be something that we get intermittently at certain points in our life, like we do other shots, and not see it as oh God, time for that booster shot again. What do I do now? And
Right.
again, hopefully this becomes just part of what we do in medical. And I want to get people to catch up on their other shots, Joshua. We've had too many people that have not gotten their other vaccines, which are standard. So hopefully we can get it all done in the next couple of months here.
Dr. Patel, I appreciate you talking this through with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still to come, we'll have the latest on the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi. When can residents there expect safe drinking water from their taps? And a third of Pakistan remains covered by floodwaters. We'll have the latest on this growing humanitarian crisis. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Tonight, the taps in Jackson, Mississippi are without drinkable water, the aftermath of this weekend's flooding. But there are signs of progress. The floods crippled Jackson's entire water treatment system. The mayor says crews successfully installed a new pump today at the city's plant. He spoke shortly after speaking with President Biden.
The eyes of Washington are watching the city of Jackson, and they wanted us to know that we should expect the full arm of support from the federal government in every way that they possibly can.
NBC's Morgan Chesky is just outside Jackson in Ridgeland, Mississippi with more. Morgan, this emergency rental pump that was installed today at the water plant there, how much is that expected to help the situation?
Yeah, Joshua, is certainly expected to make somewhat of a difference, better than what we've seen over the last 3 days. But officials were clear to say that even with this new rental pump in place, because of the extent of the damage at this plant and the silt that it's taken on from these floodwaters, there are going to be up days and down days when it comes to water pressure, and it is not a quick solution. We're talking an extensive renovation needs to be done, not just with this plant, but with this entire system. However, they do feel that this should slowly but surely be a positive step going forward. We're still looking, though, Joshua, at about $1 billion to completely do the overhaul necessary to make sure that this problem doesn't happen again. Joshua?
Yeah, how did this get so bad, Morgan? I mean, the governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves, was asked a question at a news conference this evening about accusations of environmental racism, that this was a community that had been neglected for a really long time, and this flood just kind of exposed legacy issues. He danced around the question and didn't really answer it, but is there any other sense of why this happened and why it happened so profoundly?
Well, in purely a physical standpoint, it has aging pipelines in place and a plant in place that have not been adequately maintained. Now, as for the cause of that adequate maintenance, the answer to that depends on who you ask. The governor did point to the fact that there were millions of dollars of state money given to the city of Jackson for specific needs related to maintenance of not just necessarily that plant, but of the water system. And he also pointed to the fact that the EPA had also said that this plant ran the risk of certain failures in operation if it was not addressed immediately. So as far as the bottom line cause here, Joshua, is that you have water lines that the people living in here in Jackson could have been used by their grandparents, potentially even great-grandparents, that are still in use and have not been maintained. And that, unfortunately, is the case in cities all across America. We know that in Odessa, Texas, a 60-year-old water main burst 2 months ago, forcing the entire city to go without water for about 72 hours. So, unfortunately, civil engineers tell us that out of sight is not necessarily out of mind, especially now whenever you're seeing failing to a huge degree on water infrastructure systems. Joshua?
We've heard a bunch of stories about people who are spending a lot of money on water. Here's how one mother described the expense at her household to NBC's Guad Venegas. Watch.
How much are you spending on all this water?
Now on water, just for during the summer, we've spent about $900 on water.
Wow, so you're spending a little less than 100, maybe 100 a week, or?
Yep, just on water alone. Yeah.
Morgan, there has been some help for folks to get bottled water. I know that there had been distribution of non-potable water for things like flushing toilets, but how are folks getting by right now?
Day to day, Joshua, day to day. We were at a fire station that had a line of cars around multiple blocks. A big shout out to those firefighters. They were able to get everyone through the fire station with 1 case of water per vehicle very quickly, very efficiently. But everyone we spoke to, the majority of the people we spoke to say, unfortunately, and this is tough to realize when you're looking in on this city, they have resigned themselves to the fact that this will be the status quo for an unforeseen amount of time. They will have to rely on bottled water handouts. They will have to think about where their next drinking water is going to be coming from because, as the governor mentioned, Joshua, there is no firm timetable on when people here in Jackson will be able to turn that faucet, look at the water, and think this is safe enough to drink. Joshua?
Thank you, Morgan. That's NBC's Morgan Chesky with the latest from Ridgeland, Mississippi. Clean water is also desperately needed in Pakistan. International aid has started to arrive after devastating floods there. Hundreds of thousands of people also need shelter and food. From our partners at Sky News, Stuart Ramsey reports from the capital, Islamabad.
Torrents of water still flood through the streets of towns and villages in Swat Valley in the north of the country. Communities cut in half by the waters of this absolutely massive disaster. Thousands upon thousands remain cut off here. A huge tourist destination. Dozens of hotels are amongst the buildings simply washed away. Just crossing the river is precarious and terribly dangerous. Many have risked their lives to get to dry land.
हम 2010 के फ्लड में तो मुतासिर हुए थे और बहुत मुश्किलों से और बहुत मेहनत से हमने अपने घर दोबारा तामीर किए थे। खून पसीना एक करके हम दोबारा घर तामीर किए थे। तो मैं जिस गांव में रहता हूँ जिसका नाम है जेल, उसमें तकरीबन 40 to 45 घर थे, वो तो मुकम्मल तबाह और बर्बाद हो गए।
Further south, people try to salvage what they can from their destroyed homes. A cupboard is floated downstream. They've managed to save this, but most of everything else has simply disappeared. Where they find dry land, they sit in makeshift tents, hoping that aid will reach them soon. After the flood, though, doctors are warning that waterborne disease could quickly take hold of a population now homeless and exposed. Medical teams are doing their best, but it's a huge task. Pakistan's Prime Minister met some of the survivors and is promising to rebuild their communities. But he reflects the views of this country that the world's climate crisis is to blame for this catastrophe.
The people of Pakistan are currently suffering in the form of their lives, their livelihoods, for a catastrophe that is not of their making. Pakistan produces less than 1% of the carbon footprint, but is one of the worst affected areas from climate change.
Some rebuilding work has begun on highways smashed by the floodwaters. Slowly, international aid is being sent to the country, but distribution is extremely difficult when the infrastructure has been destroyed. Food, medicine and temporary housing are all needed across the country. In Punjab, some displacement camps are up and running, but this disaster, like most natural disasters, doesn't just end. They often get worse. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Pakistan.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, starting with some breaking news in a special U.S. House election in Alaska. Sarah Palin had been running for that seat. We've got some results, and we'll have an NBC News projection just ahead. Then, inspectors are arriving in Ukraine at Europe's largest nuclear power plant. And Serena Williams is making her last expected run at the U.S. Open. Tonight's headlines begin with the heat. It is stressing California's power grid, and residents are being asked to save more energy than usual. Today, state regulators extended their advisory to conserve power, called a flex alert. It's the third one this month. Californians should power down as best they can today until 9 p.m. Pacific time, and tomorrow from 4 to 9 p.m. Pacific time. Otherwise, the high demand and lack of solar energy at night could cause outages. California and other western states are dealing with an intense heat wave. But how much longer will it last? NBC meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now with the forecast. Michelle, I see all those heat watches and warnings and advisories up and down the coast. What's it looking like going into Labor Day weekend?
Hi there, Joshua. Well, it's looking hot, not only today, tomorrow, but we're looking at a prolonged event, and that's part of the problem. We're looking until at least next Tuesday. We have heat alerts in place all up and down the coast, as you mentioned. 50 million people impacted from the northwest into the Intermountain West and also the southwest. So we do have heat advisories. We have excessive heat warnings. It's going to be dangerous, historical, and also record-breaking. We could break daily records. We break monthly records, even all-time records. Let's get into it because we're looking at numbers that Los Angeles and Sacramento they have not seen all year long. So again, 50 million people impacted by a heat alert. And as we go throughout tomorrow, we had a really hot day today. Temperatures right now in the triple digits. We're going to see that once again tomorrow. Temperatures into the 90s, into the 100s. So 100 in Reno tomorrow, the record of 99 degrees. Fresno 106, the record there of 107. Into the triple digits in Salt Lake City. Grand Junction hot too, near 100 degrees. Lancaster 111. And by Friday, no relief yet. We're looking at temperatures once again into the triple digits. We're going to see temperatures in Las Vegas 108, 109 in Fresno, 108 in Palmdale and Reno, looking at 100 degrees. Now, as we go throughout time here, that is the end of the week, but we're looking towards the holiday weekend because a lot of people want to spend time outdoors, but we're looking at sweltering temperatures continuing not only Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and possibly into Tuesday. We have those heat warnings continuing into Tuesday, excessive heat warnings once again for San Francisco, Monterey, down to Los Angeles, San Diego. You're going to see some really hot temperatures. And as we look throughout time here, we're looking at temperatures near 115 in some spots. So Sacramento sort of stands out to me. Saturday 105, Sunday 109, 112 on Monday. We are not used to those temperatures here. We're looking at temperatures 20 to 25 degrees above what is normal for this time of year. Even Los Angeles 95 on Saturday, 101 on Sunday, 98 degrees on Monday. Again, we could see our hottest temperature all year long in that area. Now, this is going to break some records. We're going to see historical data being recorded with September monthly records most likely to be broken. Where you see these red dots, these are the most likely places for records to be broken. So there's a lot through the Intermountain West, through the Central Plains, the Northern Rockies, into Central and Southern California, Northern California, and also portions of New Mexico and also Arizona. And there are some all-time records in jeopardy. So this is going to be a long, long story as we go throughout time here. We are looking at safety tips that need to be heeded because we already have flex alerts in place. We have them because we need to conserve the energy. It's a voluntary conservation, but still we're looking at people need to conserve the energy between 4 and 9. We need people to turn off the lights if they can, put their thermostat up to 78 degrees, turn off the lights, avoid large appliances, close the blinds, things like that as we go throughout the next couple of days, because once we get beyond 2-3 days, it's sort of like sleep deprivation. You can handle it for a couple days, but once it's prolonged, that's where it's really tough on the body. So here are some heat safety tips. One, you want to stay hydrated, drink lots of water when you can, avoid caffeine, avoid alcohol, stay indoors when you can. If you have air conditioning, if outside, you need to find some shade. You need to limit your time outdoors whenever you're outside with that sun blazing. And then wear light, loose clothing, so light colored, lightweight, and also loose, and also avoid some strenuous activities, because as we look towards the forecast here, not only today were we hot, tomorrow we're going to be hot once again. Friday we're looking at record highs in the Northwest into the Intermountain West, and this just extends all the way through Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Joshua?
Goodness. Just seeing 125 degrees in Death Valley, it's like, we know. We know it's hot. We know it is unnecessarily hot in Death Valley. We know. We already do. Before I let you go, Michelle, just for one quick second, the heat that we're seeing out west, is this being caused by the same like heat domes we had been seeing earlier in the year that's been fueling the heat and the wildfires? Is this a continuation of that, or is this something else?
That's exactly what it is. It's a big heat dome. It's a big area of high pressure. The climate connection is these patterns don't budge, right? So a big area of high pressure, it goes clockwise. It sort of just, it acts like a heat pump, just bringing in that really hot air, and it's hard to move it out. So that's why it stays in place for so long.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. That's NBC meteorologist Michelle Grossman with the latest on the forecast. Please stay hydrated. Please drink a little more water than you think you need, especially if you're dealing with this heat. Thank you, Michelle. Ukrainian forces are gaining momentum in parts of the country's south. Those regions are currently under Russian control. Ukraine's military hit bridges in Kherson to cut off supply routes for Russian forces. Meanwhile, inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency are headed to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russia has continued attacking the vicinity, raising more concerns of a disaster in the making. NBC foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald has more from Kyiv. Hey, Megan.
Joshua, this team of 14 inspectors are hoping to make their way inside the plant tomorrow. Once inside, they're going to be looking at everything from the structural integrity of this plant. They'll also be paying close attention to the damage that's been caused because of constant shelling and fighting in the area over the last several weeks. Another really important point here is that they want to try and speak with these employees. These are Ukrainian employees who the Ukrainian officials say have been working at gunpoint oftentimes at the hands of these Russians. And so the big question here is whether or not these employees will be able to speak candidly and freely about what's been happening inside that facility. Now, the Director General speaking earlier today saying that they feel confident that they will be able to execute this mission. The mission, of course, being to try and prevent a nuclear accident from unfolding inside that plant. This is a mission, we understand, that will take several days. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian military has launched this counteroffensive in the southern region of the country, the Kherson region. This is an area where the Russians occupied since the beginning of the war. And according to Ukrainian officials, according to White House officials, it's been working. The Ukrainians have been able to seize and take back land, territories and villages that were occupied for months now. We had an opportunity to speak yesterday to the United States Senator Rob Portman, along with Amy Klobuchar, who were in Kyiv speaking with Ukrainian President Zelensky. They say that it's the weapons given to the Ukrainians from the West, from the United States, that are really making a big difference in this war. Joshua?
Thank you, Megan. That's NBC foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald reporting from Kyiv. Serena Williams is back on the court at the U.S. Open tonight. She's playing the #2 ranked player Annette Kontaveit. Williams won the first set 7-6, and this is their first matchup. Serena Williams has said that she plans to, in her words, evolve away from tennis after the U.S. Open. She confirmed that after winning round 1 on Monday.
Will this definitively be your final tournament? And
yeah, I've been pretty vague about it, right? Yeah. I'm going to stay vague because you never know.
Because she minces words, you know. Tonight, Serena Williams played at the same place where she won her first Grand Slam title back in 1999. Still ahead, we'll have projected results of that special U.S. House election in Alaska. We'll look at what they could mean for the rest of the 2022 midterms when we come back. More breaking news tonight, this time out of Alaska. We've got some projected results in a special election for a U.S. House seat. The state's former governor, Sarah Palin, was in the runoff, but NBC News can project that Democrat Mary Peltola will win the seat. NBC senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen joins us now with more. And John, this was a ranked choice voting election, which Sarah Palin, the former governor, is blaming in part for her defeat. We'll get to that in just a second. But what does it mean that Democrat Mary Peltola will take this seat now?
Well, there are a whole lot of things that means. I mean, number one, she's the first Democrat to hold that seat in many years, basically about half a century since Nick Begich the first, the senior, held that seat. He died in a plane crash, or was presumed to have died in a plane crash. It also means that the Democrats have won another special election in a year in a Republican area. This time, Alaska, heavily Republican state. Donald Trump came in and campaigned for Sarah Palin. And of course, from a representational standpoint, you have the first Native Alaskan to win that House seat and to come to the United States House. So a lot going on tonight.
What about Sarah Palin's defeat in this? She released a statement in which she, as I said, did blame ranked choice voting in part for this. She's not disputing the results, but she's kind of disputing the results by disputing the system that yielded the results. She said that she is not going to retreat. Instead, in her words, I'm going to reload, and says in her statement, in part, let's work even harder to send an America First conservative to Washington in November. That's a quote from Sarah Palin's statement. What is the expectation in terms of this seat and how this fits into the Democrats' hopes for the midterms? I mean, was this a long shot for Mary Peltola to pick it up?
It was a long shot, although the ranked choice voting system that they're using really, puts an emphasis in a way that the elections we normally watch don't on voters being able to stop somebody from getting to Congress. And in the case of Sarah Palin, I think that's what Alaska voters basically said in this case. These candidates are going to be on the ballot again in November. We're going to go through this process again. We'll see if they have the same view after a few months of seeing Peltola in the House of Representatives. But it will be interesting to watch. One of the benefits of this system to those who like it is that you have the ability as a voter really to, as I said before, kind of cancel somebody you don't think should be in office.
Explain that little piece you just said in terms of going through this again in November. This piece of the election was just to finish the late Don Young's term. This isn't for the full 2-year term. That's in November, right?
That's exactly right, Joshua. And, Don Young had been in Congress since before I was born, died recently, opening up his seat, and this special election to fill it for the rest of this year. But for the next term of Congress, which starts in January, you'll have a typical November election. And again, we're going to see these candidates again, Peltola, Sarah Palin, and Nick Begich, who was a Republican, but from a family that sent a Democrat, his father, to the House of Representatives, and his brother, a senator, Mark Begich, for some years from Alaska, who was also a Democrat.
Do we have a sense, John, of what the big issues are going to be or what the big issues were this time around? I mean, abortion has become an extremely hot primary election or midterm election issue, understandably so. Mary Peltola has said that she supports a woman's right to choose and supports the protections that had been enshrined in Roe v. Wade. Is that what we think kind of drove the election, or were there more kind of local Alaskan kitchen table issues at work?
Sort of all of the above there, Joshua. I do think abortion was important. I think a lot of times in states like Alaska, where you have, a small population spread over a big area. It's in the West. You have a sort of a rugged independence and an antipathy toward the government telling people what they should do. And for some voters, that includes a state government saying whether or not a woman should have a right to choose. Or the federal government saying that a woman should not have the right to choose. So I think that was part of it. You also have climate change as an issue. Alaska, obviously, you just had a report on the heat in Death Valley at 125 degrees. Alaska's not there yet, but Alaska is a beautiful, pristine state, and has these important ice blocks that that I think a lot of people in the state would like to preserve. So I think there were some local issues as well as that more national issue of abortion that we talked about. And of course, the big thing here is that Peltola said she was going to work with people, that she wanted to work in a bipartisan fashion, that she had a history of doing that in the state legislature. And of course, Palin is most known, for being on the extreme edge of the Republican Party.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, considering that the results show that Mary Peltola will likely prevail by not a huge margin. So it'll be interesting to see if Sarah Palin or Nick Begich III can pull some votes away based on whatever happens between now and November. Thank you, John. That's NBC's Jonathan Allen with analysis on those breaking results tonight on the special U.S. House election in Alaska. 25 years ago tonight, Princess Diana died in a shocking crash. We'll look back at the legacy of the People's Princess before we go.
Several sources have made independent announcements that indeed Princess Diana has died tonight. The latest Associated Press bulletin is one eerie line. It just says simply, reading off the live wire copy here, she was 36.
On August 31st, 1997, Brian Williams announced Princess Diana's death over on MSNBC. She died in a car crash chased by paparazzi in Paris. It's been 25 years, and today some folks came together in her honor. Mourners gathered both in Paris and in London, outside her former home of Kensington Palace. What was it about Princess Diana that so many people around the world loved? And does her legacy still affect the British monarchy today? Let's discuss it with John Quelch. He's a royals expert and the dean of the Miami Herbert Business School at my alma mater, the University of Miami. Dean Quelch, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Joshua. Go Canes.
Go Canes. Where were you when Princess Diana died? What do you remember from that day?
I was in a hotel in Aspen, Colorado, and it was a shocking event. And I think for most British people, they regard that in the same way, etched in their memory in the same way as those who experienced the assassination of JFK or MLK in the US or 9/11 in the US. It's one of those events that's etched in the memory of all British people, I believe.
Interesting you mentioned Aspen. Prince Harry was just in Aspen speaking and referring to the 25th anniversary of his mother's death, and said that he wished that his children, Charlie and Lilibet, had a chance to meet her. He was there doing philanthropic work for HIV/AIDS prevention, and that's one of those philanthropic areas that I think she's most strongly remembered for. I mean, Princess Diana was willing to shake the hands of HIV and AIDS patients back when people thought you could get it by touching someone. She sort of reinvented the way that the world makes actual contact with the royal family.
I think that's very well stated. You're referring to a very famous event in a Harlem hospital in 1989 when she came across a 7-year-old boy who was afflicted with AIDS and held him in her arms. And of humanity on this occasion was extraordinarily important to opening up the world to understand that AIDS was not a simple contagious disease.
There was an analysis by Rhiannon Mills, who's the royals correspondent for our partners at Sky News, and she talked about the legacy of Princess Diana and whether or not the monarchy has learned the lessons from her life, whether it had, particularly with regard to the schism between Diana and the family with her beau, Dodi Al-Fayed, the Harrods, from the Harrods legacy, with regard to Harry and Meghan. And it feels almost like the similarity there, especially considering that it was Prince Harry, Princess Diana's son, one of her sons, that has gone through all of this very public drama with the royal family. I mean, have they grown through that experience? Have they learned from it?
You're right, Joshua, to refer to the fact that when Diana died, the royal family was at its castle in Balmoral in Scotland and did not immediately respond or come back urgently to London. And there was an outpouring for several days of grief and many, many mountains of floral tributes outside Buckingham Palace. Finally, the royal family came back from Scotland. They never had really appreciated, I think, the media appeal, the popular appeal of this woman who had this common touch and sense of humanity that they themselves were not able to achieve in the same way. Though, quite frankly, Joshua, the members of the royal family, for the most part, are extremely pleasant and decent people, but they just didn't have that media touch, the charisma that Diana was able to extend to so many millions of people around the world on behalf of many philanthropic causes, not just AIDS, but landmines as well was one of her big causes.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see how that evolution continues going forward. Although we should note that the Queen is expecting to receive the new British Prime Minister at Balmoral rather at Buckingham Palace, perhaps owing to the situation with her health lately. John Quelch of the University
Yes.
of Miami, appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joshua, and thank you for saying you're a University of Miami graduate. We're very proud of you.
Always, always. University of Miami will always get my love. They got enough of my money. They can get a little bit of my love. Hey, thank you for making time for us tonight. You can send us your thoughts on the legacy of Princess Diana or anything we discussed tonight. We're at NBC Now Tonight on social media. Call us at 888-575-2NBC or email nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. See you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.